Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 233. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the award-winning and internationally celebrated author, Stephen Kiernan. Stephen.
Hi,
How's
number
it going?
233, man.
That's right. See, is that an odd number? Is that a prime number? I'm not. What is an odd number? Is that a prime number?
I think it shows you have excellent taste that you found 232 more interesting people than me, and you finally got that far down the list. Like, oh, we might as well talk to Kiernan now.
Well, no, those are all practice interviews because I want to make sure I was really good to talk to you, Stephen.
I believe you. I really do.
So you have a book coming out in 2023 called The Glass Chateau. That's coming out, and that's what's really interesting. It already has reviews, so that must be some people have already reviewed it, rated it at least on Goodreads.
I'm afraid that's just like Goodreads nonsense because the galleys aren't out. It's not printed yet. People who have reviewed, no one has read it. I mean, my agent and my editor. Even like the marketing person who's handling my book at my publishing company hasn't read it yet. So those reviews are just completely fictional, but I hope that they're good ones. Did they like it?
One was a 5-star and one was a 4-star. So I'm wondering what that fictional person gave you 4 stars didn't like about the book they haven't read yet.
That's very funny. Like who holds an old grudge and won't give me a 5 for a book that isn't even out yet?
I know.
Maybe they gave it a 4 because they wanted it to come out this month and it's not going to be till June. Who knows? I don't know. But no, there's no reviews yet. And, I'm at the point in the process where I can't do anything else. The book is finished and in production. Right. So I hope people love it. I love writing it.
Well, and you also is like, watching some of your previous interviews, you are a writer. Like you just write and write and write and write. And like you first started off as a journalist and you did some nonfiction stuff. And now you're just doing mostly just historical fiction right now, correct?
Yes. So excuse me, I wrote on the side. Well, I did other jobs for many years. And then I really fell in love with working in newspapers. And it was a great job. I felt all the time like I wished I was older and knew more. But every day was an education. It was very compelling. I liked it. And it was a lot of time with sentences and with words. So there was some craft training that was happening all that time. But I was also writing novels on the side all that time. And then some of the things that I've been writing about in the news, I turned into my first 2 books, Last Rites and then Authentic Patriotism. And one of those books, the first one, Last Rites, led to a lot of speaking invitations that paid pretty well. And so I was able to take some time and just do that speaking and write a novel now that I was really a lot more experienced than when I'd tried novels before. And so now the one that's coming out in June, The Glass Chateau, that's my 5th novel. And the 6th one is finished, and I'm working on revising it right now. And the working title is Words for Snow. And, I've been really lucky that I've had smart editors and good publishers that have done really a reputable job. I've been fortunate with that and very fortunate with it. And so, I haven't had a job or a boss in almost 19 years. And The thing is that I do have a boss, and he's never stops beating me to get back to work. And I published my first novel at 53, Barney. And, now that I have this incredible opportunity to just write novels for a living, I kind of don't want to waste a minute. I waited a long time. I wrote 4 books that got rejected everywhere. I really want to keep on doing this as long as I'm drawing breath. I got stories galore. And I'm writing a lot.
And so, when you first started off and you kind of got your foot in the door by putting out some of those nonfictions ones, I compare that to the passion that you're doing with your fiction stuff. Were they necessary for you to start writing your fiction novels, or were you still had that passion of the stuff that you wrote about in your nonfiction work as well?
Well, Barney, first of all, I want to congratulate you. I've never been asked the question quite that way before, you know. And most people just go like, "Was it hard to switch from journalism to fiction?" You know, and you're asking in a more complicated way. The first thing is that that publishing a couple of books in nonfiction did sort of open the door to the publishing world for me. I had an agent, I had an editor, you know. I ended up changing both of those things in time, but like I knew what a book was and how it was produced and some of the business of it and that sort of thing. And I think also publishing a couple of books of nonfiction kind of gave me the courage to try novels again. I had written a novel that got 37 rejections. And the reason I remember is that that's how many commercial publishers there were in the United States of America, 37. And they all said no. And I had really worked hard on it, and I thought it was pretty good. You know, a quiet novel, but that deserved publication. And so after that, I just said, you know, okay, I'm just going to concentrate on my journalism. And, you know, and a lot of years went by and decades. And then the success of nonfiction made me say, with the encouragement of some writer friends, I have to be honest, saying, you can do this, you should try this again. I had a night when I was on vacation, on a bicycle vacation with Danny Yetton, who's a playwright in Middlebury and a professor at Middlebury College, a good friend, and Chris Bojalian, who's, you know, probably the most successful Vermont writer in history in terms of, you know, books sold and books produced. He's unbelievable and is a wonderful, good guy and very close friend. And I was drinking a lot of red wine with them one evening, and I told him the idea that I had for this not entirely morally scrupulous cell research lab, and that I wanted to write a novel about because there was so much kind of creepy stuff that was being done with DNA and so on. But it missed something. It was missing something, and I didn't know what it was. And Chris said, well, it's missing the main character of this book needs to be a brilliant, beautiful woman. And Dana said, no, she needs to be a beautiful woman. And Dana said, who is smarter than all the other scientists. And I was like, I'll be right back. I ran off, and I came back about a year later, and I had the curiosity. And so they literally gave me like the courage to do that. And then I was off to the races, you know. And now I feel like I've been a novelist forever because I was always telling stories. And now it's how I make my living. And
right.
God bless the readers who make that possible. You know, every blessed one of them that picks up a book means I get to finally do what I've always dreamed of doing.
Well, and The Curiosity came out in 2013, so this has now been 10 years that you've been doing this. And your other novels had more of a historical bent, or more of a World War II, well, except for The Hummingbird, but The Baker's Secret, the Universe of Two, but now also the Glass Chateau, all kind of have this.
Well, The Curiosity, one of the main characters is a man who was born in 1780. And so there's a lot of history there. And then The Hummingbird is about a hospice nurse taking care of a man who's terminally ill, and he's a historian, and he's trying to finish a book before he dies that is about a Japanese pilot who bombed the mainland of the United States in World War II, and then came back in the 1970s feeling remorseful and gave the people of the town where he dropped those bombs a samurai sword that had been in his family for 400 years. And that is based on actual history. There was a Japanese soldier who bombed the mainland United States and came back 30 years after the war and gave a samurai sword to the town of Brookings, Oregon. And it's in the public library there. And I was like, that's such a great novel. And so anyway, that's the book that this dying man is trying to finish. It's about this case. I think, and then the Baker's Secret, that was basically D-Day from the French perspective. What it's like to live in occupied Normandy, and you have no rights and not much food. And then one day, 200,000 strangers come and lay their lives down by the thousand to set you free.
Right.
And then, and then Universe of Two, this is a love story set amid the development of the atomic bomb. And I'd be happy to talk for 45 minutes or an hour about the new one, which is also
so good. I'm curious too, because the Glass Chateau also takes. Is it almost like a sequel to the Baker's Secret? It almost seems like it's connected in some way.
It is connected in a bunch of ways. One is that it's set in France.
Right.
And the other is that it's the same kind of community story. The Baker's Secret is about one town, and this is somewhat about one town, but really about one group of people. The Glass Chateau is, that is, one group of people outside of a town. And what I'm trying to do, Barney, with all these things is not just tell like a pretty story about the past. I'm trying to tell a story that I think reflects on the present time. So, for example, the Glass Chateau, this will be out the 20th of June, okay? Here's the story. You have a nation that is damaged in lots of ways and has an enormous rebuilding task to get to what it used to be. However, the people are politically and financially and culturally totally polarized. They think the other guy is not only wrong, but he's immoral and stupid. And there's a former president who believes he's still in power and holds rallies and gives speeches, all of those things. And what I'm talking about is France immediately after the end of World War II. But it correlates. It correlates with now. And the ways that France rebuilds and the stories that I tell of these people who should not get along. They should not, for a whole lot of reasons. And what they're doing is rebuilding the stained glass windows of the bombed out cathedrals of France. And that work helps them to heal. And because that work requires all of them to work together, as a group, they begin to heal. And this is how you rebuild a country, I believe. And so, there's one scene where one of the characters, a woman, is saying, before you kill each other, reflect on all that you have built, all that you have made, and imagine what you still can build. And that inspires them to do some things that I'm not going to tell, but I think are pretty good. But so it is, yes, it's a history book, right? It's about a time in France, but it's absolutely relevant to now. And this is what's fascinating to me, is to find these stories in history that are pertinent, that do say something about now. And so it's not just like a recitation. Here's what it was like at Valley Forge.
Right.
It's more like, hey, all the scientists that were working on building an atomic bomb didn't want it to be used.
Right.
That's really what University 2 is about. They did not want it to be used. They signed petitions. They asked the president and the Secretary of War and everyone. They did everything they could to prevent it from being used once they understood what its power was. So, like that.
Right. So I'm curious too, because of the fact that you mentioned as well, is that as a journalist you kind of have to look at facts, but as a writer you have to kind of look at feelings. And how did you, when you're writing these books and you kind of come up against something that's factually, historically didn't happen, be like, well, that doesn't really fit within my story. I need to, how much artistic freedoms do you take to make sure that your story flows in the way you want to take it?
Oh, that's the thing, is reality is a tough taskmaster, right?
Right.
And you can't say we bombed 3 cities in Japan. That's not going to work. Okay, we bombed 2, right? So what happens is, first, from the research standpoint, let me say this. I adhere to the reality. And it is one of the challenges of writing these books to make them adhere to the reality. So, for example, the Baker's Secret, that French perspective on D-Day, a French person is not going to know 101st Airborne from 82nd Airborne. They're not, okay? But I need to know. And when the soldier appears, I need to have him in the right uniform, with the right gear, with the right mission, even with the right food. I need to know down to that level. And the great thing about D-Day is that it's spectacularly documented. There are 3,000 oral histories that are on tape at the museum in New Orleans for D-Day. There are excellent books about it. I interviewed a guy, Vermonter, who was second wave on Omaha Beach. And I mean, I did all that so it would be down to the minute accurate. I took one liberty, and a bunch of readers called me on it. They saw it. So I learned my lesson, and so I really stick to it. And it was very difficult with the universe of two because I needed a couple to get married by a certain date and get pregnant by a certain date, so that she would be pregnant, when Hiroshima happened. So there's like a lot of the story that gets bent around it. That said, it's a totally different kind of research, because as a journalist, you're looking for the fact. You're always looking for that telltale fact that will say, oh, actually, this guy, this congressman, he never went to this university. He didn't work for these banks that he said he worked for. And here are the facts. You're looking for that. And when you're writing a novel, you're looking for something different, like this. In Los Alamos, New Mexico, where they built the atomic bomb, it was the largest collection of Nobel Peace Prize winners, current or future, in the history of the world, including even when they give the Nobel Prize now in Stockholm, right? This was the largest collection of those kinds of minds ever, and the milk was always sour. Somehow, like, they'd get good milk down in Santa Fe. It was a tough drive coming up the hill there, but it's like 26 miles up to this fortress up on the mountain. And the guys would be, sitting with a bowl of cereal, and the guy be going, "You're going to have cereal?" His buddy be like, "Don't have that cereal." He's like, "No, the milk got here last night. I saw the truck arrive. It was still cold when they put it in the freezer." And the guy be like, "I wouldn't do it." And the guy takes one bite. "Oh, it's awful. It's awful." And it humanizes these scientists in a way that the facts don't. There was another example I'll give you, a great cultural divide in Los Alamos, because there were the military guys, okay? They were guarding the fences. They were saying, you can't come in to people outside, and they were saying, you can't go out to people inside, so there wouldn't be spies. They were worried about information being stolen by spies, all that sort of thing. They had uniforms, they had ranks, they had duties, they had barracks, they had clear mission and orders. And meanwhile, there are these flaky, weird guys, unwashed, maybe stinking of the lab, wandering around, looking at the sky at all hours, like smelling bad. Like, what are they doing? There was this total kind of contempt for the scientists. They're just wasting time here. There's a war going on, and they're just wandering around, scratching their heads, right?
Yeah.
Until the test in Alamogordo, the Trinity test. And then they said, oh, this is what you're building. This is the most terrifying thing that ever existed. This is hell on earth, and you made it. And that shift in culture. Now, there's a million facts behind what I described to you, but this is a story about humanity and different attitudes at that time. And the scientists, by the way, barely even noticed that the army was there. They were so busy with their mission and what they were trying to figure out that they barely noticed. So it was a one-sided antagonism. So the research tells me those things, and that makes it very human. And so I'm less interested in the fact. I'm more interested in what the human piece of that time was like.
Right. Good. So a couple pieces that you brought up, and as you mentioned earlier as well. Do you see yourself what drives you to your writing? Is it like exploring characters and settings, or is it telling a story?
Yes. Barney, if you count all the different newspapers I did it at, for about 14 years, I wrote editorials, the daily opinion piece that a lot of newspapers don't do anymore, except the major metros. And one of my brothers used to joke, everyone is entitled to Stephen's opinion. Because I had 365 opinions a year.
Yeah.
And, I think I entrenched more people in their views than I did cause people to change their views, I think. But I definitely wanted some people to change their minds, or at least think a little differently about things. And I'm still doing that. I'm just using a long form. I'm using story. And the way that the people of France took care of each other when they thought that no one was ever going to come to save them is a way we should take care of each other on this earth. And the scientists who, once they understood what it was they were building, that they tried to kind of put the genie back in the bottle, that they actually understood the moral consequence of what they were doing in a way that we don't really think about so much anymore. Right? Vladimir Putin says something about nukes and we get all worked up, but we have thousands more than he does.
Right.
But we don't do that. We don't look in the mirror about that. The only country to use them so far is us, and we killed tens and hundreds of thousands of people, and lots and lots of justification, lots of good arguments to be made that have brought the war to a swift conclusion. And probably saved hundreds of thousands of lives. And as I did the research, that stuff is pretty compelling. But nonetheless, can we look now at, like, before we point at somebody else, can we say, well, like, these are the sorts of things. So it's like a 100,000 word editorial hidden in the story. And some of it is also that I don't know the answer. And so what I really like to do is have the questions. So for example, there's a woman who's in the Universe of Two, there's a woman who's really upset that the bomb was used. And she's talking to a woman whose husband was going to be part of the invasion of Japan. And she's like, you don't like the bomb? I love the bomb. My husband's coming home and we're going to make babies and we're going to live together for the rest of our lives instead of him dying on some beach on some tiny island. And there's some truth to what she says.
Right.
And these women have this argument, and I'm not trying to decide. I just think the argument is really human and
right.
interesting, and maybe gives us something to think about. So yeah, the characters have got to live, and I have to love them, and I tend to fall in love with them a lot, even the villains. And I do like what the research requires me to learn about places, whether it's clambering all over New Mexico or it's spending a bunch of time in Normandy on those beaches, and that's kind of the great privilege of this job. Today I spent the afternoon, just to put a bow on it. I spent the afternoon at AO Glass in Burlington, which is biggest glass foundry in Vermont, making glass flowers because of the people who are glass makers in my novel, The Glass Chateau. I spent the afternoon making glass. Cool, like I love my job, and part of it is also because I need to know what it's like to be holding a piece of glass that just came out of the oven with a metal tool and feel the metal tool get too hot for your hand because the heat of the glass is right. A character will have that experience, I guarantee you. Yeah.
No, do you? Because you said also before in a previous interview that if we're lucky, we're going to probably read 3,000 books in our lifetime, and you said something along the lines of, if you don't like a book, don't feel like you need to finish reading it. Like, if you don't like a book, there's plenty more books out there. And you also mentioned that you do a lot of, you got a new book coming, like you have a new idea. So when you do research and you find something on a book that you're writing and it sparks an idea of, oh, I want to write a book about this. I have a story I need to tell about this. Do you have like a list someplace that you have to you prioritize your stories? How does that work?
All right, I want to answer the first part first, if I could. Excuse my cough here, but in the old days, when you're riding in your car and a song comes on the radio that you hate, you have not heard 4 measures of it, and boom, you would hit the button on that radio and change the station like that, right?
Right.
You're watching TV and the Jets are getting their butt kicked one more time. You just click, gone. Right? You don't even think about it. You're watching a movie and suddenly it's really Game of Thrones, and you turn on the first episode of Game of Thrones, and there are those dismembered bodies lying in the snow, and you go, not for me, off, no problem. Something about the form of a book, people be like, well, it's too gruesome for me. I'm just going to read 8 more books about, about this. I mean, there is this way that people feel an obligation. I'm glad, because sometimes my books, lag. I know they do my best, but there you are. But I think that also there are great books to be read, and there's nothing wrong with putting one down. And I'm not going to suggest any that you ought to put down, but sometimes it just doesn't fit you for whatever reason. So what was the other question you asked me was,
how do you prioritize?
Oh, my
because
idea.
you always, your ideas, and how do you do that? Yeah.
The honest answer is failure. What happens is when I send a book off to my editor, I enter a period of great insecurity. Even though I love her and she's really smart and she makes my books better every time, I go into a period of insecurity that does not end until the day the book is published, because I just don't know. I just don't know. I did my best, but I don't know. And the way that I kind of avoid neurosis about this and just getting anxious completely is that I start another book. And I always think this is great. This is going to be right on the heels of the other one. And this is so good. And I always get about 100 and a quarter, maybe tops 150 pages in. I'm like, this is a dog. This is no good. This is just, and I literally just have to fail. And then I put it aside. And then I have all of these other ideas that I've been thinking about for years. I've just a little bit embarked on a project I've been thinking about for 6 years, because I learned about it when I was doing research for The Baker's Secret. So maybe even 7 years. I think it's 6 though. I've been thinking about this, and I've got a bunch of these things where they're like marbles in my pocket, and I'm turning them over and over, and I pull them out and look at them. And then there's a time where I say, oh, this is interesting, because now either there's something intellectually or emotionally interesting me about this, or better yet, there's something in this story that now kind of pertains to the world. Right? And so I had that stained glass idea. 2017 was when they had the great Marc Chagall exhibit up at the Museum of Fine Arts in Montreal. And that was my first encounter I had with his stained glass windows, which are not like any other stained glass windows done by anyone else on earth. And I will tell you that the stained glass windows that the men make in the Glass Chateau, they're Chagall's windows. Wow. They are. And I traveled a lot so that I could see Chagall's windows in lots of places. And I've read lots of books about Chagall and all that stuff. So we came to a time where I wanted to tell a rebuilding story about a polarized nation. I'd had that idea since 2017, some version of it. And then there was a day where I had finished a book called Words for Snow that will be out some future year. And I was like, well, what am I going to do next? And I started writing the idea that doesn't work, and it failed. And when I put it, it was a novel about Jackson Pollock, the painter and madman. And when I put it aside, then it's like, well, what do I have that's a rebuilding story? The world really needs a how do we get from where we are to a better place? Well, here's this story about rebuilding France. I'm going to start doing some reading about this. And I find out that de Gaulle didn't cede power and that he was holding rallies and stuff after he was out of office. I was like, oh, what else we got? What else we got? And that the Marshall Plan, which was the American money to bail out France, didn't really get there till almost 1950, late 1940. Wow. So they were on their own and starving and rebuilding and all of that and struggling all that time. Like, perfect.
Right.
Here's a way to tell a story from the past that reflects on now. So I got a bunch of ideas in my head. I don't know which ones are going to be the failures. There's one every book. I'm sorry. I wish I could skip that part. I really do. But it's always like 6 months of wasted work, but it's just how I go.
I was going to say, so when you look at it, like for when you send it to your editor, and also when you bring it off to like your agent, is there somewhere where there's a point where they say, yeah, I don't think this is sellable? Do you ever take a book like, well, I like this book. Do you ever think about doing self-publishing on the books that don't make the cut for your agent or anything like that?
I don't. I think there are people for whom self-publishing really makes sense, because they've got things they really want to have kind of codified in book form. You don't get reviewed, you don't get distribution, and you don't get paid. And I want all of those things. This is how I make my living. But also, my agent is on my side. My editor is very, very much on my side. And I trust those people a lot. They also give me plenty of rope to tie myself up with, plenty of artistic leeway. Every editorial suggestion my editor has ever given me has been optional, right down to the title. Right. She gives me that freedom. So, but I also, you walk into her office and there's the shelf that's all #1 bestsellers. Well, how does she do that? Those are a lot of different kinds. There's Jodi Picoult, and there's Neil Stevenson, and there is, I don't know, like all different kinds of writers. And I'm in that office. I'm going to listen to what she has to say. It's not, the myth is that it's an antagonistic relationship. In my case, the reality is this is somebody who knows a lot, and I will listen. Also, working in newspapers has taught me, because editors saved me many times in newspapers. And when I was an editor, I saved reporters many times just by catching something that wasn't clear, or that would have gotten you sued, that wasn't worth getting sued over, and things like that. And so I came to believe that the editing process was a collegial and effective one. So I will usually, before I embark on one of my new ideas, I will sit down with my editor and my agent, and say, I got 4 or 5 ideas. Tell me what you like.
Oh, okay.
And she will say, I'll be like 1 sentence in, and she'll go, no. I'll be, no, listen, 2 more sentences. No. Like, she doesn't mince words at all, which I love.
Right.
Right. And then I'll tell her something else. She'd say, well, that was interesting. That would be interesting if you did this or that. We might play with it. I should add that this meeting never takes place in her office. When I have 5 or 6 books to present to her, it occurs with glasses of wine in front of us someplace, in the financial district of New York City. And we would never get a bottle of wine, because that would imply that we were drinking. So we just get 1 glass of wine at a time, and I pitch her on these things. And invariably where she lands is the one where I to start to say, this is a piece of history that reflects on now. Right. And then she listens, and she says, that's kind of what you do. And, even if you don't always write history, I mean, a lot of Hummingbird and The Curiosity is set in present time. And this one, Words for Snow, that I mentioned, it's entirely in present time. Still, it's about, like, how does this story reflect on us as a society now? What's the long moral of the story, I guess?
Does your stories fit within, say, like a different genre? Has anybody ever asked you, any of your colleagues, say, hey, have you thought about putting this into as a play, or putting this as a script of some kind, or anything like that?
The Curiosity was optioned for film for something like 9 years. And I saw 1 screenplay, and I didn't love it. And I know that there was another one, and then it was reconstructed for television, and they had a pilot and I think 5 episodes and a 5-season plan. And so there were a lot of different ways that it was that they had been fooled with. What I know is that those are a different art form, so it would not be for me to write. I have tried. I've written 2 screenplays, and they both weren't made into movies. Let's just say that. It's its own art form. And I have a couple of friends who are film writers, Vermont based, and very successful guys, and they're really good at what they do, and it's different.
The Glass Chateau, the Baker Street, the Universe of Two, do these all kind of take place in the same literary universe? Like, for instance, is there any cross-pollination of characters, or could the characters from Baker Street to go, like, yeah?
That would be really cool if I were that smart. Here's how they work. Okay. Here's how the extent to which they are connected. The Hummingbird, which I mentioned, is about the Japanese pilot.
Right.
That involves the Pacific theater of World War II. The Baker's Secret, which is set in France, that's the European theater of World War II. Universe of Two takes place in the United States. That's the home front of the war. And so those 3 were really kind of, I did want to write one of each of those perspectives, because it was a world war after all. The new book, The Glass Chateau, is after the war. And in fact, the opening scene is a bunch of guys in the resistance are out in broad daylight in the town, at the town fountain, for the first time in years. What they see at the town fountain is a bunch of German prisoners of war that are waiting for a truck that's going to take them back to Germany. And so the war has ended. That's the opening scene. These men are carrying the war with them in their memories, in their consciences, and in their wounds. And so that's a lot of what the novel's about. Actually, none of them are physically wounded, but they are all emotionally wounded. But it is not so much a war story as it is a rebuilding story. So, if I were smarter than I am, maybe I would have connected these books, but each one really arose of its own accord. with what the moment called for, and what I was able to write. Some of these stories, to write a D-Day novel, I needed to get a couple of books under my belt before I could accomplish that. You know what I mean? You have to be like, I'm the atomic bomb, like that's an intimidating subject. It is. And great books have been written. Tread carefully here, and so yeah, I'm more concerned about that, about just writing the best book I can. And I wish I were smart enough to link them all together. That'd be pretty fun, actually, kind of meta.
Yeah, almost like there's some tertiary character in the background that is connected to one of the other books. But yeah, so I gotta say, this has been a genuine delight chatting with you.
Me too. Thank you.
Exciting. Right,
Thanks for having me, Marek. Real pleasure.
We'll end before 8. So
okay,
yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Because the longer we go, the more I have to edit. So I don't like editing.
We'll keep
so
it easy. I'll try not to swear.
Yeah, I get in the post editing. I do have a beeper in case if you do, so it'll be fun.
You should just beep a bunch of my sentences anyway. Everyone will think I'm
Make people guess what you're saying. All right, here we go. So let me do the intro. Here we go.